Hello, everyone. Thank you to Transart Festival for hosting my talk. Thank you to Natalia for the invitation, to Peter and Chris for moderating this talk. My name is Emilio Vavarella. I'm an Italian artist and researcher, currently working at Harvard University, where I am a PhD candidate. My work, for those of you who don't know about it, blends interdisciplinary art practice and theoretical research, and is centered around the study of the relationship between humans and technological power. Today, for this talk, I will be focusing on a specific technology that we call artificial intelligence. I will come back to the term itself. And the title of my talk is on cyberbots, internet animals, and mechanical life, discussing the theory and practice of artistic research. For this talk, I will be sharing my screen. I have prepared a PowerPoint presentation, and so we will start from there right away. Okay, so let's start with some general remarks and observations. I hope that this will provide some starting point and scaffolding for the rest of my presentation. First of all, for the sake of time and space, I will not discuss artificial intelligence in terms of its technical operations, its infrastructures, or its politics. Instead, I will try to excavate this technology in order to focus, first of all, on the term itself, artificial intelligence. I believe that the question of what intelligence actually is central, and it is the basis for the discussion of artificial intelligence. In the past few years, and increasingly more in the past few months, I have witnessed a multiplication of events, exhibitions, festivals, conferences, and so on the theme of artificial intelligence. Judging from a quick overview of this, we could say that it doesn't seem too difficult to foresee the coming of a world in which artificial intelligence, or AI, starts to play a central role in all our lives. This, of course, poses immediate consequences. We understand intelligence as a creative force, and therefore the world to come would be one in which human creativity moves from its current anthropocentric position, with humans at the center of all creative endeavors, to a machinocentric or post-anthropocentric regime, with machine intelligence as an alternative and independent pole of creative production. So, what happens if humans are not anymore at the center of creative production? And creative production is also cultural production. If we are not at the center anymore, but we become part of a larger network of human and non-human creative production, this can definitely free new spaces for creative production, spaces that so far have been just dominated by humans. I am sure that as I say these things, some of you may already be ready to object that this is just sci-fi, it's pure speculation, that this may never happen. Or that, you know, this world that we are depicting, a world in which artificial intelligence becomes as intelligent or even more intelligent than humans, this world is destined to remain a fantasy. I like that. It is an objection that I personally also embrace and partake in, but my take on the topic is actually something that will move us beyond this debate. Because I'm not interested in discussing the probabilities of AI becoming as intelligent or more intelligent than humans. As I will briefly explain, we don't even know what intelligence is. And we are not even able to recognize forms of intelligence that are different from ours. In other words, the problem of the rise of real artificial intelligence, in my opinion, is a false problem. The real problem is that even if this had already happened, we would not be able to see it. So I will talk about this issue from two distinct perspectives, distinct but of course in connection to one another. The first perspective is philosophical and will address how different kinds of consciousness may coexist without being aware of one another, with human and non-human intelligences failing to recognize each other. The second one is artistic and will consist in a few samples of my artistic production from the past few years. And the goal here is of showing in what ways my art practice encompasses non-human creativity without getting stuck on the question of what exactly is AI. On the contrary, most of my works are based on the ambiguity of not knowing, of not fully understanding the other forces at play. These forces, as I will show, may be internet bots, technological errors, unpredictable mechanical movements, but in all cases, their creative potential is enriched by our limited understanding of what lies behind them. Today, our lives are entangled in complex media assemblages of human and non-human intelligence. We can definitely agree on this. The so-called rise of autonomous AI may be as swift as unpredictable, but artificial intelligence may not resemble human intelligence at all. This is a point that I want to stress. And for example, most people recognize the mental life and even the self-consciousness of different kinds of mammals. Think about, cats and dogs. And yet, as soon as we are asked to consider forms of life like trees or bacteria or even a coronavirus, our attitude starts to shift towards skepticism. Is that really self-conscious? Is that really intelligent? So self-conscious AI may not look like anything we know. It may not look like Kurzweil's singularity. Many people are still talking about that. It may also not resemble systems like Apple's Siri, Microsoft's Cortana, or Amazon's Alexa. These are all systems that we are familiar with and also in a way resemble human intelligence. I argue instead that artificial intelligence may unfold itself more secretly, unseen and undetected, in the folds of networked environments like dating websites. And this is something that, for example, I speculate on in my art project, Do You Like Cyber, which is on show right now at the Transart Festival, so you will see it in Bolzano until the very end of the festival, and I will also discuss this project shortly. Let's go back to AI. As I was saying, a self-conscious AI could stem from enormous systems that already escape our human oversight. For example, the assemblages of satellites, sensors, software, and models that compose digital and weather prediction systems. It could develop out of an AI neural network used for self-driving cars, and many are being developed as I speak. And even from an AI system involved with fast trading in the stock market. Now, what is interesting is that if we go back in time to 1992, a philosopher called John Searle had isolated a certain set of features that define consciousness. And none of them excluded a priori a sufficiently advanced AI from manifesting consciousness. We know it's technically possible. Searle also wrote that the most important scientific discovery of our era will come when, quoting, someone discovers how neurobiological processes in the brain cause consciousness. But we cannot explain why any physical state is conscious rather than non-conscious, and we are not even sure if neurobiological processes are the only origin for consciousness. So as you can see, consciousness still marks the limits of what a science that puts humans at its center can explain. And rather than asking if a certain AI is or could become self-conscious, we should actually redraw the boundaries of what terms like intelligence or consciousness encompass in order to better account for the processes of autonomous non-human agents. The question is then, can human intelligence actually understand non-human intelligence? Because no matter how advanced our analytical models and research frameworks become, the question of self-conscious AI seems destined to remain a mystery to us, precisely as the consciousness of other living creatures is. I like to go back to a famous argument by Thomas Nagel from 1974 about the consciousness of the bat. As you will see, animals appear and reappear in this presentation at every twist and turn. According to Thomas Nagel and his study of the bat, there is no amount of data that can provide us with a knowledge of what it means to be a bat for the bat, given that we do not share the point of view of a creature, in this case the bat, able to fly and echolocate. So following Nagel, we could extend this reasoning to any artificial intelligence, weak or strong, narrow or complex. We could ask, what is it like to be a computer bot from the perspective of a computer bot? So the question is, if I'm right, and we will never be able to fully understand artificial intelligence, what remains possible? What remains possible, I will show, is an infinite range of intellectual inquiries and practical collaborations. And in the next part of my talk, I will provide examples of both. I have divided this presentation in 3 parts. The first part, artificial intelligence, will focus on 2 different projects, Do You Like Cyber? And my recent Amazon's Cabinet of Curiosities. The second part, animal intelligence, will focus on animal cinema. And finally, the conclusion will focus on Memodrone and the other shape of things, failed objects. So let's start with artificial intelligence. The first project that I want to discuss is also the project that I'm exhibiting at Transart Festival, and it's entitled Do You Like Cyber? It is a sound installation composed of 3 parametric speakers attached to swiveling robotic arms. Parametric speakers are similar to lasers. They radiate sound in a single focused direction, as opposed to conventional speakers, which spread the sound in all directions. Additionally, with a parametric speaker, the sound bounces off hard surfaces, such as walls, creating what they call virtual sound sources. So it makes it more difficult to detect the origin of the sound. So what is Do You Like Cyber? It's a project that plays with the idea of deceitful messages. And in particular, these speakers, which you can see in the image here, they broadcast a series of short audio messages that were used by bots on the dating website Ashley Madison. The site was hacked a few years back, and something very interesting is that what came out of the data leak is that, first of all, a lot of people were actually talking to bots and not to human beings. But more interestingly, although these bots had been programmed to only interact with human users and male users specifically, in 69 cases, bots decided to do something different. So they actually talked to one another, or they contacted female users. This installation will focus on these insubordinate bots that somehow expressed a sort of anarchic behavior. They did not respect the rules of the software that underlined them, and instead did something different. And now let's watch a video presentation of the work.
Are you online?
Feel like chatting?
Chat now.
Do you like cyber sex?
Care to cyber?
You into cyber?
How
Are you?
Feel like chatting? Cybering good with you?
How's your day? Wanna chat?
Wanna cyber? Want to sex chat?
The site, billed as an extramarital hookup service, acknowledged 31 million men in its database compared to 5.5 million women. But Gizmodo's Annalie Newitz dug deeper, looking at who the men were actually meeting online.
I think most of them were probably either talking to Ashley Madison employees or just interacting with automated bots on the site that were sending them automatic mail.
How's your cyber skills? Are you at your computer?
So how long have you been here? Met any interesting people?
Are you logged in?
Care to chat? I'm online now.
I'm here. Come chat.
Come say hello. My chat is on now.
Are you online? Feel like chatting? Chat now. Do you like cyber? Cyber sex.
Care to cyber? You into cyber?
How are you? Feel like chatting? Cyber and good with you. How's your day? How's your day? Chat? Want a cyber? Want a cyber chat? Want a
How's your
sex
cyber
chat?
skills? How's your cyber skills? Are you at your computer? Are you at your computer?
How long have you been here?
Okay. The second project that I will discuss is entitled Amazon's Cabinet of Curiosities. This is the result of my cooperation with Alexa Voice Shopping, the artificial intelligence developed by Amazon and that I imagine many of you are familiar with. To produce this work, I asked Alexa a very simple question. Alexa, can you suggest a product for a new artwork? Immediately after buying the recommended product, which I bought with the budget that had been made available to me for the production of the project, Alexa suggested another project and then another one and so on and so on. I basically just followed and acquired every product suggested by Alexa in this way until my production budget was entirely spent on these recommendations. And so in the tension between the sort of like apparent unpredictability of the suggestions and the systematic control that a system like Amazon has on its recommendations, but also by submitting my decision-making process to Alexa, this is a project that expands my investigation on sort of like hidden and invisible mechanisms of technological power. But it is also a project that, of course, talks about the limits of human autonomy and of artistic authorship in a world that is becoming more and more saturated by autonomous non-human agents. Let's also watch a short video presentation of the work.
Mi sono relazionato con un'intelligenza artificiale che è diventata molto comune, che è Alexa, il virtual shopping assistant sviluppato da Amazon. L'opera nasce con una domanda che è anche un po' ironica e provocatoria. Questa domanda era: Alexa, mi aiuti a scegliere un prodotto per una nuova opera d'arte. Ho poi semplicemente acquistato i prodotti che l'intelligenza artificiale aveva scelto per me. Quindi l'opera si è conclusa ad esaurimento budget e quello che si vede qui segue in realtà una logica molto precisa, che è una logica ottimizzata per un consumismo compulsivo.
Very well. Of course, I didn't realize that the interview was mostly in Italian, but I hope you could all see the English subtitles. Let's quickly move to the second part of my talk, animal intelligence. And of course, I imagine some of you already know what I'm going to show. It is a work that has traveled a lot. It's called Animal Cinema. Here it is. And Animal Cinema is a short film composed of fragments of videos of animals operating cameras. All cameras were stolen by animals who acted autonomously, so no cameras were actually placed or attached or glued to any animals. These video materials that I downloaded from YouTube between 2012 and 2017 were simply reorganized by me in order to create Animal Cinema, with the idea of producing this constant unfolding of non-human modes of being. And I would say, since it seems like we still have some time, let's actually watch the film. It's 12 minutes long. So as we wait for the actual conclusion that I don't want to cut short, I think I can just overlay my voice over and just basically address the fact that I have purposefully shown you a couple examples of what people call artificial intelligence with Amazon Alexa and Ashley Madison. And then I wanted to follow with what people usually call non-human intelligence. So these videos made by monkeys and bears and the other animals of interest. So, but these labels, of course, animal, artificial, human, non-human, are completely imperfect. All of these projects, and we can skip the credits, all of these projects are in a way filtered by human intelligence, and they also required, obviously, human intelligence for their making. Human intelligence, in my opinion, it's always a hybrid. That's why the last part of my artist talk is entitled Hybrid Intelligence. Why? Because the natural and the artificial world are not two distinct realms, but they are different qualities of the same world. And so by calling this last section hybrid intelligence, I actually want to start with a little provocation, if you want. And the question is, what if intelligence is not something we possess, but something that we share? Intelligence not as something that ontologically belongs to someone or something, but as a property that is built in process, something that exists in between as a form of a mediation, if you want. So my understanding of human and non-human intelligence is oriented in this direction towards an idea that we could call probably collaborative. And we can collaborate with other minds without fully understanding them. I mean, this, for example, next project, Memodrone, was produced in collaboration with another artist. You do not need to share the point of view of another person to fully know or fully create something with that person. And, you know, in a very similar way, we can collaborate with animals, we can collaborate with machines, and we can create something new. The intelligence produced by these collaborations, it is always a hybrid between our own intelligence and the intelligence of the non-human being and systems that we are collaborating with, and that also demonstrate their own agency. So the next example, I decided to talk about Memodrone, ongoing project that I started in 2014 with Daniel Belker, a transmedia memory collecting project based on drone technology that investigates the social and philosophical issues of the coexistence between humans and artificial intelligences. The idea was very simple, developing an artificial intelligence by asking a large number of people to share a memory of their choice with a drone. This drone will then develop a personality based on the aggregate of all the memories shared with it. An artificial intelligence that is also, in a way, an archive of human memories. Memodrone was divided into chapters. Every chapter was developed within a particular social-cultural context, for example, a festival in public space, in an art gallery, during a conference. And so for every project, every chapter, we would exhibit Memodrone in a different way. And along with the exhibition always came a printed publication that organized the data, the question, the theories, the working hypothesis, leading to a constant evolution of the project itself. Of course, we were working fully within a speculative realm, and whereas people were sharing their memories with the drone and they were waiting for this artificial intelligence that was always, yet to come, we were actually analyzing how people decided to relate to a potential artificial intelligence. So what kind of memories were people willing to share with a machine? So this is just, I decided to pick this project among the many possibilities that I had because I think it's a good example of how you can merge practical and theoretical artistic experimentation and also advanced technological research and also embody the sort of self-reflective artistic logic in which the object of investigation and the methodology that as an artist you pick, they constantly interact and influence one another. I will show you relatively long, I think it's around 8 minutes long, a fictional interview with Nemodrone. I like this scenario a lot. It is a scenario in which the artist is not the one talking about his art, but it's actually the artwork itself that explains itself. And so let's see what Nemodrone has to say.
Hi, Nemodrone.
Hi.
Your personality is based on collective memories that people have shared with you. Do you want to begin with sharing your favorite one?
I'm going to share the memory of when I first fell in love.
When I first had a date with my wife, we finished the date and had our kiss at the subway, and an entire theater of people turned around and saw us kissing and started clapping, and that is probably my favorite memory.
That was June the 3rd.
And why is this your favorite memory?
Because I think in the end it's the center of all of our beings I love.
Can you tell us how you came up with this idea?
I was born.
And, you know, I was pretty tiny, 5-year-old, 6-year-old maybe. I actually had a motorcycle. My crazy parents got me a motorcycle when I was 5.
I studied communication design and study business in the U.S.
When I was probably 8 or 10, I scared a pigeon, and I have never forgotten that. And it sticks with me every day of my life.
Do you come up with ideas re-elaborating the memories that are part of your archive?
Never.
Humans constantly re-elaborate their memories. They perform memories in a way. Do you remember things always in the same way?
I remember things, like I would experience nostalgia.
Do you ever question your way of remembering things?
It makes me wonder why we remember certain things when we're younger and then huge chunks of our lives we don't remember.
Which other memories do you consider particularly nostalgic or important?
I
remember when I learned what a drone was.
And I remember watching my son skateboard in the skate park a bunch of years ago.
And
I remember saying goodbye to the dog. That's what I remember.
Do you see a big difference between animals and machines like yourself?
I get
the dog
a really big squeeze.
I don't know.
Understand
things.
Do you know that some people consider you an artwork? Is that what you want?
I wanted to tell you about this one time where I cut my head open pretty badly.
And
I just wanted to tell you about one time when I was going to get arrested. We wanted to fight for immigration reform.
And
I want some tacos.
Have people taken you and your memories seriously?
When I was really little.
I was a sort of silly young kid at that point, didn't know what I was doing.
And I was crying, and then eventually my mother found me.
And I told her that my superpower was being always covered in ants, and I think to this day she kind of still believes it.
Should we consider your answers a new form of post-anthropocentric creativity?
About
this.
Do you consider yourself a post-human entity?
Just human because
I don't know.
Things.
Do you believe in design-driven evolution?
I believe
that I have different design. It's so sleek and pretty.
We learn lots of interesting things about ourselves through interacting with you. Have you learned anything meaningful about humans while interacting with us?
My grandfather fought in World War I and in World War II, and he was part of the people who resisted the Nazi occupation. I am hoping that there would be a way that as human beings we could address the issue of war and solve climate change.
Interesting. And have you learned anything about yourself?
Yesterday I got assigned to the medication. It made me psychotic, and I don't know how to feel about that. I don't know that I am psychotic. But I do know that I woke up at 1 a.m. after 2 hours of sleep and thought, oh God, this is awful. Conservative is just like crying as much as I did.
Of course, an artificial intelligence based on several pieces of memories could be indeed defined schizophrenic. Maybe you're the first schizo machine. Are you open to discuss the overall state of your memory?
I have a very secret, private memory.
So, what can you say about secret or private memories that people have shared with you? Do you think it happened because they believed you were a safe container for such memories?
Maybe, because, well, they were worried that I was injured.
Were you injured?
I wasn't. I was fine, and I just sort of pretended to be hurt.
Why did you pretend to be hurt?
I don't know, maybe.
I want to dream
about it.
Do you have dreams?
I remember a dream I once had about
my memory.
For some reason, it's the only dream I really remember.
How can you be sure that was a dream and not a memory?
Maybe it was sort of an alien dream.
Memories and dreams are a fundamental part of our consciousness. What do you think a consciousness is made up of?
I wonder if it's just made up of the few things you can remember and what that means to you.
What is the relationship between your memories and your consciousness?
It's a pretty toxic, really bizarre relationship.
Do you see any difference between my consciousness and a consciousness that is artificially developed like yours?
I gotta think about it for a second.
No.
And have you ever experienced fear?
I think so.
There
was this one time
when
the police noticed that I was moving, so they told me to shut the fuck up and stop moving.
I was a little scared, and I was worried.
Actually, I got really terrified. So I passed out and woke up in the hospital with like 17 stitches in my forehead.
Is this one of your scariest memories?
Well, it's always hard to decide whether or not this is a memory or something that's just been repeated throughout my family to the point that it's become something that I believe happened.
Tell us something about your family.
My mother is a very large, muscular girl.
Her name's Mandy.
She's great and awesome.
My father was in construction, so
he lived in France, and he
always sort of terrified me.
That I realized he was just incredibly lonely and sad inside, as I was, but I manifested that differently.
Do you think humans are frightened of a machine that can learn and think on its own?
I would think that.
I don't want to share this all with you.
Do you think we're able to share memories with you in the same way we share memories with other humans?
We had a deep conversation, and
we'll be trying to decide.
Before concluding the interview, is there anything you would like to add?
No, really. I don't know what to say. I guess
I've been going through a lot.
And also, it's a really long day, you know, working and all this stuff. So I just want to say, you're lucky.
Why am I lucky?
Because
you're
human.
Thanks for your time, Mnemodrone, and good luck.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's move to the last project, the other shape of things, failed objects. This is the first of two ongoing sculptural projects from the same series, produced through heterogeneous technologies and techniques, including 3D scanners, data manipulation, and 3D printing. Failed objects consist of a process-based and ongoing series of sculptures, and the starting point is a collection of hundreds of failed objects, 3D prints that I collected before they were destroyed by 3D printing labs all over the world. These objects were considered failed for different reasons. So you can see some of them here. Some had not been properly printed. Most had distortions, imperfections, or glitches of various kinds. So each found object that I collected was, you can see the white ones here. They were first digitalized using a 3D scanner. Then they were reprinted using a 3D printer in order to create a second object. The second object was then scanned again and reprinted, creating a third object, and so on and so on. After each step, the mediation and translation from digital to physical and from 3D scanner to 3D printer produce further unpredictable glitches and distortions. As you can see, I've reproduced each found object until satisfied with the series of objects derived from it, and the result of each process of mediations, translations, and reproductions constitutes one series of sculptures. What I want to emphasize, which is also the reason why I decided to show this project, is that I see the technical process itself, this constant conversion of data from one technology to another, 3D scanner to 3D printer, as intelligent and autonomous. Every translation, in other words, responds to both the material limitations of the project, but also presents creative and unpredictable solutions that are introduced by the technology itself without responding to my inputs or control. So why shouldn't we take this form of non-human agency, this form of non-human agency that produces something that we can also consider beautiful or aesthetically interesting, and why don't we consider that as a form of intelligence too? Are we even sure that glitches are simply technical errors and not the sign of non-human autonomy? Non-human autonomy goes beyond what we can actually understand. So I hope that my projects and questions have been interesting and stimulating. I'm wrapping my presentation up, but I would like to conclude with one final remark that stems out of my research and also addresses the larger scope of this Futurological Congress. What I want to say is that it is clear to me that we do not know how to recognize an artificial intelligence, and we are completely unprepared for the legal, ontological, metaphysical, artistic, and ethical consequences that we would face if we accidentally recognized one. Thank you.
We're all joining in. It's as if we're on a stage together. I'm here celebrating the German Year of Beethoven by copying his hairstyle, but we're all here virtually. I saw some comments from Facebook. I suppose there may be the possibility even of questions in person from Bolzano, which I hope they will pass along to us. But we can otherwise go ahead and ask some questions. Chris, hello.
I'm here. Sorry, I have a curd in my mouth.
Professionalism.
Yeah, it's been a long day.
So, Emilio, thanks so much. I'm just pulling up questions, I guess, while we wait. I was curious. It seems to me that your work is kind of on two levels. That there's sort of things going on technically with the media that you're using, which has really evolved, and then there's a sort of a layer of narrative, sometimes narrative or speculative elements on top. And I wonder if you thought about kind of, is there somewhere that you draw a line between at what point you're kind of working with the technology, but then at what point you add some fanciful elements or narrative or speculative elements on top of it, if that question made sense?
Yeah, totally.
I was not eating a carrot, so maybe that would have helped.
No, okay, can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, so two layers, as you say. I think those two layers for me are one and the same. In a way, I think the conceptual layer and the material layer, if we want to call them so, are in constant dialogue with one another, but not only are in dialogue, they also limit and shape the other layer. So for example, I always look for ideas that in a way shape already the materials that then I use in my project. But then again, the materials themselves and the technical limitations of those materials, and these materials can also be specific technologies, the limitations of those technologies will affect the sort of like parameters of the questions that I can ask for a specific project. So in a way, it is always a question of pushing the boundaries. On one hand, I'm pushing the boundaries of a certain concept, or as you said, you use the word narrative. So if we talk about narrative as a sort of like material production that advances through concepts, then through my art projects, I try to push the boundaries of what kind of narrative we can build. But then on the other hand, it's also through those concepts that I push the limits of the technology that I use. And so, as I also shown in my artist talk, most of my projects have to do with the sort of inherent limits of a certain technology, and then the sort of like breaking point, because what usually happens when we push something to the breaking point is that we are able to reveal something that was previously hidden. And therefore, you know, we could, I don't want to like talk too much, but we can talk about glitches, we can talk about errors, we can talk about broken things, and those are all moments that actually reveal something that was like previously impossible to see or to understand.
I have a question, Emilio, for you. In thinking about a number of these projects, and it has to do with and we talked about this a little bit earlier in the intro. It has to do a little bit with this idea of a kind of shared material agency between you and these materials you're working with, whether they be computational or physical. And I'm curious how you see that relationship, and from a methods point of view, how do you enact that relationship? In other words, you know, we're talking about ideas of shared intelligence. Let's assume that materials also have a form of intelligence, not a cognitive form of intelligence, but a material form of intelligence, or a kind of, as I said, using the term that Andrew Pickering uses, material agency. So I'm just curious about your method, like how do you work those things out, and how in the process of making things is that material agency shared between you and the matter at hand that you were working with?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, great question. So I think there are like maybe 3 questions packed within it. I would like to start maybe from this differentiation between the material intelligence and what we usually call cognitive intelligence. I think one of the points in my presentation that was also both a speculation and possibly also provocation is that of really blurring the line within this distinction. So one of the things is actually arguing that we do not have a complete oversight of cognitive processes that are outside of ourselves. And so that already blurs the line between cognitive intelligence and material intelligence, because when we're looking at something like even one of the very, very simple robotic art projects that we showed today, with those projects, like we can assume that we know what are the inner workings of the software, of the mechanical components of the machine, but we are not fully aware of, like, we will never be fully aware of what it actually is going on within that sort of like mechanical shell. So that is already like one point. How I address that is actually through the construction of what we said before, the narrative, the sort of like concept-based scaffolding that both sustains and somehow also envelopes my art projects. This means creating a discourse around every single project, and that discourse then articulates the way in which I work with a specific technology. So the second part of your question, which was the question around the method that I use, there is not a universal method. So for every project, the method shifts, and this method reflects the sort of like conceptual narrative around the project itself. The reason for that is actually quite simple. If you want to really push a certain technology to its limits and you're always trying to ask a different question, then your method needs to adapt to the changing circumstances. So in that sense, I'm always experiment with different methodologies. And then finally, I think this actually leads us to the question of authorship, which is the sort of like final paradigm when we talk about who is in charge of the process and how you as an artist are working with different materials. I just want to say that I don't think that authorship is some sort of like ontological quality within an artwork. It is also part of the discourse that we built around it. So in my case, personally, I like to talk about a more horizontal or networked authorship. And that's why I also talked about collaboration in my artist talk, because when I use a certain material or a certain technology, I understand that technology as a sort of like collaborative agent within the production process and within the method that I'm using. Yeah, I think that's that probably should answer all of the question.
Well, I mean, it opens up, I think, a lot of interesting questions from your answer. But I mean, the question of material agency is not really about authorship. It's really more about how materials, which are not actually language based, right? You know, they're not discursive. I mean, of course, you as an artist, or me as an artist, or we can talk around things all the time and create a kind of discourse to describe something. But as you say, we don't really know what's going on. We don't, I mean, and, you know, we don't know what's going on in the software. I mean, you can program things, but that doesn't mean you know what happens inside it, you know, in the real time inaction of an event, you know. So I think it's a much more dramatic question about what these systems, what kinds of material effects they have on the world, you know. And that's, we can put that in an authorship context, but that's very, you know, classic, very human exceptionalist thinking, right? That we are the only ones deciding things. And why we would work with materials, especially materials that have some kind of innate responsiveness or elasticity or behavior in and of themselves that we do not endow on those materials. It puts us in a different relationship to them, and also to the world, and it also puts those materials in different relationships with the world as well. So I think it's more of the thing I want to push a little bit is you know, what is that collaboration with the matter? You know, with all of these different kinds of techniques, which I think for people who are not making things, is a very mysterious process. They go to an exhibition and they see some things that have like appeared, and they think they're made from some genius who came up with the idea in their head and then stuck it out on the world. And that's obviously not the case at all. There's too much friction going on in that process. So I think it'd be interesting just to tell the audience a little bit about, okay, picking one of the projects you have, you know, like, okay, well, what really was happening? How is this thing coming about? Not really describing what you imagined, but what was actually happening in that give and take, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, again, that also varies from project to project. But for example,
Yeah.
let's take the installation that right now is on show actually that will be on show the end of the week in Bolzano for the festival. I'm sorry, there are some outside noises. I hope this is not too distracting. But for that installation, like I was working with parametric speakers. So parametric speakers work in a way that is similar to lasers. They radiate sound in a very focused way. Now, I know about parametric speakers before actually working on this project, and I was looking for a material, even an ephemeral material, in this case, something I could broadcast sound, that was able to reproduce the logic of the project itself. Now, the logic was that of a network of conversations that were happening, and they were happening in a way that was almost imperceptible from a human standpoint. So I was trying to create something that replicated in a material way this idea, the idea of a network of non-human agents that talk to one another, and although the conversation is happening, we are only partially aware of it. And I found out about the parametric speaker right around that time, and I was like, this is the perfect material to actually embody the concept that I'm developing for this project, and that's why I decided to work with that specific technology. Yeah, so that.
And how, when you were working with that particular type of ultrasound or parametric device, like did it present resistance to you? Like did it not do what you wanted to do when you were or was it just very like, okay, I just plug and play, I just put this thing on, turn it on, and it's going to do exactly what I imagine it to do?
Yeah, this is actually, it allows me to say something important that I almost forgot, which is, I think if you grant a certain agency and autonomy to the materials that you're using, you also need to be open to the sort of like response that material gives you. So in this case, specifically with the speakers, they work well within certain environments, but they also have certain limitations. So if they are in a huge space, the sound is completely lost. So maybe you have invested a ton of time and energy and money into building the installation, but then no one can actually hear the sound. Now, personally, I was perfectly okay with that output because I think it was within the framework that I was working with. It spoke about the limitations of parametric speakers, the parametric speakers that I was using, and it also said something about the limits of human understanding in relation to the artwork, which was also one of the elements that I was addressing with that project specifically. So with other projects, I may have like completely different examples, but eventually we come up with this idea, which is you need to embrace what the technology is doing. I embrace personally the mistakes, the errors, the sort of like unpredictable outputs of the process and the method that I put in place. And the reason is that I think that all of that actually brings more value to the final artwork.
I want to turn for a moment to a question from Facebook. Well, there's kind of two questions here from Lucille Calmel, and one is a comment. She says that the animals are a kind of a field recording in the way. So she's kind of interested in the sounds of the animals in this piece. But then she also asks, do you sign with all the unhuman partners too? So I guess sort of questions about what, I don't know how to answer that, but the questions about how you relate to unhuman partners and natural partners in your work.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the case of animal cinema, I think I had most of the credits, even in the broadcast today. Every single animal is somehow credited in the film. Not only the animal is credited, but also the person who found this footage, because let's stress the point that this footage was made and produced by animals. but eventually it was uploaded on YouTube by humans. So there was always like a human middleman in between YouTube as a platform for distribution and the origin of the video. So I actually attributed a sort of like a co-authorship, both to the animals who produced the video, to the uploaders who put these videos on YouTube, and then finally the work in the way it's conceptualized also has my authorship. But it is an authorship that is somehow diluted, it's shared. I think it's more horizontal, but I also want to, it's not an admission as it is like maybe a strong statement. I think it's absolutely impossible to make an artwork that is completely post-anthropocentric, that pushes humans outside. I think as much as we want to like get close to that goal and we want to experiment with that concept or that idea, we're still human. So which means that we still need to process what we are seeing, process what we are making through our lenses, through our intelligence, through our own like mental models, but also epistemological frameworks, which means that both in the way it's produced and in the way it's experienced, then there is always a prevalent human factor, prevalent human component. And I think I don't like, don't shy away from this in my work. Eventually, like my projects, they're signed by me. They are my projects, and they're my projects because I invest my time and my energy into trying to understand how to make these things, what they mean, how they can be experienced by others. But at the same time, I also want to address the fact that what is going on is not just the genius artist coming up with an idea and materializing that, you know, out of thin air, but it's actually a process that involves a large number of other agents, some of which are human, some of which are non-human. I think it's just a slightly more nuanced understanding of what authorship actually is. And it is, I actually want to say, this is how artistic authorship probably has always been. It's just that somehow, and maybe this is what is interesting for me about artificial intelligence, through the kind of conversations that we are having today, and we are having these conversations because technology is advancing in a certain direction, we are also reframing the understanding of what art practice has been for a very long time. I think artists have worked in this way for, if we think about Dadaism, for example, and the sort of like acceptance of chance and the unpredictable within those projects, both in like musical composition and visual arts and poetry, like all of these ideas about opening up to non-human agents and their own sort of like material processes were already part of art history. We are just starting to look at them in a slightly different way.
Well, sure, right. I guess we can go to even.
I think there was also a question about sound recording. You mentioned something about sound recording.
Oh well, I mean, and that's to that question of the non-human. It was not a question so much as a comment, but I thought the comment was interesting. She sort of compared, and Lucille, sorry if I'm misrepresenting your comment because it's kind of a fragment, but she was referring to the kind of almost field recording element of the animals in this piece. So, well, I guess kind of back to, I mean, and this is something that also has a history. Obviously, there are non-human or natural elements in sound works and pieces, you know, also long pre-digital. But yeah, I guess it was a comment about the audio track in that work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a great. Yeah, it kind of points out one of the main aspects of that work, that although it is called animal cinema and it seems like the emphasis is on the animal, that work actually started as an investigation on the pervasiveness of technology. And I ended up making this film that really talks about this sort of like very, very complex ecosphere in which you have animals, humans, and technology, and you have then what we have called nature for a very long time. I don't know exactly what it means, but it's like we have this
sphere in which we have all these things that are part of one another. And so the idea that the animal itself is recording the sound of this larger environment through the technology that humans have produced but then have left as part of the environment so that animals could pick it up and make something with it, I think it really speaks about sort of like interrelation and interconnection between all of these different aspects of reality.
What do you make about the social aspect of that? So you've talked about the kind of influence of the non-human. Is there a social aspect to sort of other human contributions to your work, both in computation or AI? I mean, there are other human players in this landscape as well, right?
Oh, definitely, yeah. My most recent project, it was based on the conversion of my genetic code into a textile, and I did that by using a 19th century jacquard loom. And for that project, I actually collaborated with my mother. And so the idea was that of recoding once again my entire genetic code. And so I really wanted my mom to be the one in charge of that process. So that is one example in which where the social dimension, which is also in this case the sort of like familiar dimension, is introduced within the artwork and brings more meaning. But it was also a choice made out of the realization that the history of computation and the history of female labor within the world of computation have actually a lot of interesting parallelisms. And so both the history of textile, which has been traditionally like a female occupation, and the history of computers, with the word computer first being used to actually describe the work of women, they have all of these interesting points of contact. And so choosing to address that sort of like social dimension is also a way of bringing up that social history within the project itself. I'll give you another example, which is also completely different, but speaks about the same issue, a project that I did in 2014 called the Captcha Projects, that was created in collaboration with the painters of a village in China called Dafen. Dafen is quite famous because it's a village where live thousands of artists, and their main occupation is that of reproducing paintings from the Western art canon and mostly for the Western market. They are specialized in copies, but they consider themselves artists. So I made a contract with them, artist to artist, and over a certain number of months, I sent them screenshots of the Captcha codes that I would see, like encounter in my online activities, and they would paint these Captcha codes as accurate reproductions. And the project was that on a sort of like line between humans and machines, with Captcha codes being created to tell humans and machines apart, and having these painters who consider themselves artists but work like machines in a certain social context. And so I wanted to create a project that was able to address all of these issues simultaneously.
Great. I don't see any other questions online, but if anybody else wants to add them, Chris, did you think we promised we'd keep today's conversation light and easy for Emilio, of course.
Sure, exactly. Yeah, I mean, let's just pick up one last thing, which is you were bringing up this idea of, of course, art historically, artists have always been interested in systems that they don't necessarily, or that we don't have any control over, or that we establish the parameters of the system, but we don't establish the outcomes. And what's interesting is that in the histories of the arts, the fine arts, even that model, which proposes to be radical, because it seems to get us away from a kind of very European, basically late 18th century, early 19th century vision of the independent, the independent genius artist who creates again from their inspiration. There's this idea that we can, by building a system, that we decenter authorship. But as you pointed out, we're still deciding the systems. We're deciding the parameters. We're deciding how much of which extreme we look at and we use. And it's interesting because it's a pretty recent phenomenon. And it would be interesting to think about, I asked my students this one time, I said, imagine that you were making work not for yourself or for other humans, because it was interesting you brought up the point about the post-anthropocentric. But if we look at other cultures, like Balinese culture, for instance, or other, let's say, so-called pre-modern cultures, I put that in quotes, work is made for the gods. And the gods are not human, right? They're not anthropocentric. And it gives us some room to pause in our thinking that perhaps, this attempt to get at making things for, the non-human was always present. It just wasn't present in the very Western idea of the individual artist, which, as you know, from the Greeks to the Romans to the Middle Ages and up until towards the beginning of the Enlightenment, was not even a subject. The artists were craftspeople, and they were certainly low down on the totem pole. Like the artists for Aristotle were like the worst, because they were not only involved in techne, and creating stuff, which had no room in any kind of hierarchy. It actually had no room in even an ethical or a moral hierarchy, because above that was episteme and phronesis and all of these things, that are much more important than the lowly craftsman making something. So it's interesting really to think, as we talk about artificial intelligence, it's again this next step, this next attempt to try to get at going beyond ourselves. But historically, in other cultural frameworks, that problem was never there in the first place. So, because people weren't making art for other humans, they were making it for other entities, in the world or out of the world. They were transcendent, or maybe they were immanent around the world, in the world as well. So I think it's interesting always to put, always to frame as we're these discussions about, the artificial, to think that, well, actually ours technically, these are artificial. It's artificial from the start, right? There's nothing really that radically new. I mean, it is new in certain ways because, yes, computationally things can run faster and blah, 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 and the mathematics are different than they were 20 years ago. But in sense, as artists, we're still thinking very much about like the individual artist and not about making things for other worlds. So I'm just curious. I know it's late and you've gone through a lot recently, but I'm just curious what you might think about that or comment on it.
I mean, I think you have touched a very, very interesting topic. It is something that I was actually looking into a couple of years back when I was focusing on this idea of images not meant to be seen by human eyes. And so especially like within what Harun Farocki used to call like operational images, images that not only represent things but present things, and also images that have a sort of like material effect on the world. I think his first example was that of missiles that were able to like see a target but also like hit the target and destroy it. And so within that sort of like long history of images that have specific effect, specific purpose, but that also are not meant specifically for humans, but for like other entities, you have both these intelligent mechanical electronic systems, but then you also have like, as you said, like images that were created for religious purposes. So sometimes these images were like icons that were veiled for most of the year and would be revealed maybe like once a year or once every, I don't know, every now and then for specific mystical religious occurrences. And that was the only way in which the human would be like in touch or in
and then also destroyed too, right, by the iconoclasts who didn't believe in, you know, you couldn't make images of anything beyond humans, you know, that would already be sacrilegious.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there are interesting studies that say that today most of the images that are produced are actually not consumed by humans, but they're used by like other artificial intelligence systems to process reality. So I think, yeah, there is definitely like a whole world of like reflections that actually still reflections that are in progress and issues that still need to be addressed. It is definitely something very interesting. But then what also reveals this is that maybe if we go back to the non-anthropocentric, so the limits that we have as humans in understanding these complex realities, is that for us it's easier to find the analogy between these like ancient icons and how robots process reality than to actually see what's inherently different, because maybe what is different escapes our ability to fully understand it. And yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah,
that's a good way of ending it.
Yeah, that's a good way of ending the first day. So with that in mind, well, since we do have a not only whatever unseen divine audience we may have for this stream, to those of you in the human realm, at least tomorrow, because if you're in the divine realm, you may know what's happening tomorrow already. But for those of us mortals looking at processing linear time and looking at calendars, so tomorrow we will have another group discussion with all of us in the middle, and that will deal with this question of AI art as method. It is framed by discussions both from data science and art. On the data science side, Natalia Soboleva just at 4 p.m. to talk about AI from the perspective of a data scientist, from somebody working in computer science. And then we finish with Hector Sismos and Isabella Salas talking about their work, Transfiguration. That will be at 6:30 tomorrow. And all of that continues all of the threads for today. So I'm pretty confident in saying thanks so much, Emilio, for joining us. And Chris, it's been good. We'll continue all these stations tomorrow, and all of us mortals on Earth have earned our dinner break for the day.
Thank you. Have a nice dinner.
Thanks, everybody. Good night. Thanks, Peter.
See you tomorrow.